Thanks for logging on to myfoxhurricane.com. So we've got a lot to talk about here. The tropics still very active. We're just past that peak of the season. Remember September 10th, the peak of the hurricane season. And so we're just past that, but we're still in that area where you expect to see a lot of activity, and things have been active here. We've seen a number of waves working their way across the middle of the Atlantic. So far, none of these have really produced anything. There's still the possibility, but we're also this time of the year heading towards the end of September, heading towards October. We really start to look closer to the Caribbean. Closer to home is what we refer to it as. But as you look at the list where we've been so far, we've had Gordon. We'll watch that one area just kind of fizzle out. Watch the possibility it might intensify, reorganize itself. Just didn't ever happen. So the next name on the list is Helene. Big question is, when are we going to get to that next name? And you know what? It could be fairly soon. As you look at what we call the name climatology, where we typically see each one of these names. We had Gordon, that was the G name, back on September 13th. Typically, we see the H name right around September 9th. So just kind of speaking strictly on climatology, we're kind of running behind on these names. Kind of everything's been delayed here because we've had this little quiet stretch here, a little bit of activity, but things have been relatively quiet, especially considering we're kind of in that peak of the season. I think we're all okay with that, to have some quiet time in this. But as we go through the month of September, it's really all the areas that we have to watch. We have to watch well out into the Atlantic. Remember, for a time, we just didn't see much activity out there just simply because we had some strong wind shear, and we also had a lot of that dry Saharan dust. A lot of that has come to an end, so now from time to time we're seeing some waves working their way off the coastline. But as we head towards the end of September, heading into October, we're really starting to focus more on these areas across the Caribbean, up into the Gulf of Mexico, and also into the Western Atlantic. A lot of the time, this time of the year, what we're watching is a return of these cold fronts pushing down across the southeast, and you get these old frontal boundaries, and you start to see some of these areas of low pressure forming along that. That's exactly what we saw just the other week with that potential tropical cyclone number 8 just off the Carolina coastline. That was an old frontal boundary, and we watch for something possibly tropical developing. That time around, we just didn't see it happen, but there's always that possibility. And you see, even with that, it did not take an actual tropical system because it didn't acquire all those tropical characteristics, but we still had winds, tropical storm force, and they saw substantial, just torrential, historic rainfall across portions of the Carolina coastline, causing significant flooding, a lot of beach erosion as well. So here it is. Here's the setup that we're looking at right now. We have a couple of areas out into the Atlantic that we're watching. This first one here, that is Invest 96. We also have another area further out into the Atlantic, an area working its way off the coastline there. Short term, not going to see anything happen with that. But as it continues to work its way on towards the west, Hurricane Center now putting that 40% chance that we could see something developing with that. So it's another area we're going to watch. But obviously, everybody's been talking about the Western Caribbean. We've been focusing in on that very closely over the past several days as well. And we will continue to focus in on that very closely. But first stop, this is that Invest 96. You can see that little flare up of convection with this kind of working its way on towards the north. The wind shear starting to increase over this. So doesn't really look like much is going to happen with this as we go through the coming days. And if it does, it doesn't really matter because you see the track with all the computer models. It's out over open water. So we're not concerned about anything developing with this. It's just that kind of pads those the statistics with this. So here is the Fox model watching that Invest 96. We'll also be watching this other wave working its way off the coast of Africa. So watch, that continues to work its way to the north. We're just not seeing any signs of any development. Here we are heading through Monday afternoon, and notice this area out here. Again, not seeing anything in the short term, but as time goes on, you do start to see the signs of something developing here. So maybe starting to get some of that low-level circulation. We'll have to wait and see to see if we get that defined center of circulation. But even if anything develops, it's way, way out there. Plenty of time to watch and see what happens with this. But the general idea is it will continue on that westerly track as we head through the week. So we're really going to focus in on this area across the Western Caribbean. Hurricane Center now pegging this with about a 70% chance of development over the next 7 days. Conditions do look favorable that as we go through this week that we're going to see more organization. We've got warm water, we've got the light wind shear, so we do expect to see some slow development with this. And as it works its way up into the Gulf with all the warm water, we could see this starting to ramp up in intensity a little bit more, a little quicker as well. And a big part of this forecast is going to really kind of play into the jet stream and the ridge of high pressure, which is over us. How quickly that kind of moves out of here, that will kind of determine where this goes up into the Gulf of Mexico. But it looks like right now the most likely scenario would be something across the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So that is obviously poses an issue for us here on the west coast of Florida. We don't want something all that close to us. But as you look at the wind shear, right now you're seeing some stronger winds across the Gulf of Mexico, but it does look like these will continue to subside. So we're looking down here and we're watching something moving up into this area. So after that goes away, and this jet stream starts to lift back to the north, that's going to allow for some ideal conditions across the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, a lot of dry air is in place, and this has been because of that jet stream pushing all this dry air down across the Gulf of Mexico, which has given us all the nice weather. We've seen these daytime highs still on the warm side, that humidity ever so slightly lower, and we've cut back on the rain, but the moisture is building down across the Gulf of Mexico. So what we're looking at here is just this overall spin across the Western Caribbean. We call this the Central American gyre. You can think of it as just a large area of low pressure, and this area produces just locally heavy rain. It can cause mudslides and flooding across Central America, but it can also help to aid in the formation of tropical systems, and that's what we're watching. And we see this quite often in late spring, also into early fall, and so we are right at that point right now. We've got this big dip in the jet stream, which has given us the night's weather. We also have this ridge of high pressure, and then you have this developing gyre down to our south. That is that big spin in the atmosphere. Now watch what happens as we go through the next several days here. There's that trough starting to lift back to the north. This ridge is starting to recede a little bit, but if it stays a little bit stronger and this is over here more, well, that's going to tend to kind of protect the state and not allow anything to move all that close. It would push it more over into, say, the central Gulf of Mexico. But as you get this gyre, what sometimes happens is you get these little areas of low pressure that are developing in this, and then they start to acquire those tropical characteristics. So that is what we are watching right now. We're already seeing the signs of this gyre developing, and what we're going to watch for over the coming days is these areas of low pressure developing, and really all the computer models are on board with this idea. We're seeing this really for the past, say, 6 days, 5 to 6 days now, this same idea, and more of the computer models coming on board with this. So you watch here, we've got the European in white, we have the GFS in red, and we have our own exclusive Fox model in green. And here you see it down across the western Gulf of Mexico, this area developing down here. And then as we head through the middle of the week, this is starting to work its way up into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, still a lot of this is a lot of questions because we don't have that actual center of something to be tracking. So we are going to see changes in this as we go through the coming days. But the idea is whatever develops down here is going to work its way most likely up to that Yucatan Channel, and that puts it into the central and the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So that's obviously a big concern for us here on the west coast of Florida. We want to see this further away from us, but we have this developing system tropical depression, tropical storm, most likely at this point. But remember, we've got the warm water. We have that low wind shear. We have ideal conditions right now across the Gulf of Mexico. So this will likely continue to develop as it works its way to the north. Do we end up having a hurricane out of this? Certainly the possibility. And then this continues to work its way to the north. So this is just one run of these computer models. And we've seen this back and forth. We've seen them shift to the right. We've seen them shift to the left. And again, as we go through the coming days, things will change. And we will really start to fine tune this once we actually get that center of circulation. Now, a lot of it's really hard to pinpoint right now when we don't actually have an actual storm to track. But the idea is right now we're seeing the most likely scenario, given the current setup in the atmosphere, that we would see something working its way up towards the panhandle or just off our coastline. So we have to watch this very closely because it could just as easily be further to the east. It could just as easily be further towards the west. That's why we have to watch this. Here it is on the Fox model, showing this area developing down to our south, working its way towards the Yucatan as we head into Tuesday and Wednesday, starting to see more development with this as well, and then pushing up into the Gulf of Mexico, pushing, looks like, up towards the panhandle. But remember, we got to watch this because it could shift quite a bit over the next couple of days. So we're going to continue to try and fine tune this forecast. We saw this over the past several storms, a lot of dry air wrapping around the system. But with this, it looks like we will most likely see plenty of moisture being pulled up from the south. That yes, there will be some dry air, but it probably won't be dealing with that same kind of a situation with a lot of that dry air really kind of choking off the system, which again gives it those favorable conditions to see it developing. And then you look at the wind field with this as it works its way up into the Gulf of Mexico. We want to see, is this a tropical storm? Is this a hurricane? And again, we're still way early to kind of determine this. But the Fox model kind of showing that idea that we could be talking about a strong tropical storm or a minimal hurricane working its way through the Gulf of Mexico as we head into the second half of this week. So we will continue to fine tune this as we get that center of circulation. We get more of the computer models kind of honing in on that exact center. That will give us much more detail with this system. Of course, we will keep you updated right here on myfoxhurricane.com.